The stagecoach rattled into Redemption Springs, Arizona Territory, on a blistering afternoon in July 1876, and Catherine Morgan stepped down onto the dusty Main Street with nothing but a worn leather satchel, $23, and a determination to never look back at the life she had left behind in Philadelphia. The heat hit her like a physical force, so different from the humid summers back east, and she stood there for a moment, letting the dry desert air fill her lungs while the other passengers hurried past her toward the shade of the nearby saloon. She had sold everything she owned, broken off an engagement to a man her father had chosen, and bought a one-way ticket west after reading an advertisement seeking a schoolteacher for this remote settlement. The bruise on her wrist had faded during the long journey, but the memory of her father's rage when she had refused to marry remained fresh. She was 22 years old, and for the first time in her life, she was truly free. The town sprawled before her in shades of brown and gold, with wooden buildings lining a wide dirt street that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon heat. Catherine adjusted her traveling dress, which was already clinging to her skin despite the dry air, and looked around for someone who might direct her to the person who had hired her through correspondence. A group of men stood outside what appeared to be a general store, and she was about to approach them when a tall figure separated from the building's shadow and walked toward her with an easy, confident stride. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting, wearing a dust-covered shirt, worn denim pants, and a belt with a holster that held a single revolver. His boots were scuffed and practical, and his hat had seen better days, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made Catherine pause. He had the look of someone who belonged to this harsh landscape, who had been shaped by it the way wind and water shaped stone. "You would be Miss Morgan," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. His voice was deeper than she expected, with a slight drawl that suggested he had been raised somewhere in the South. "I am Garrett Sullivan. The town council asked me to meet the stagecoach and make sure you got settled properly." Catherine found herself looking into eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green, the color of sage after rain. "Mr. Sullivan, yes, I am Catherine Morgan. I was expecting to meet with Mr. Henderson." Mr. Henderson had to ride out to his ranch. One of his hands got trampled by a horse yesterday, and he needed to sort things out. He sends his apologies and asked me to help you get situated. Garrett reached for her satchel without presumption, and Catherine found herself handing it to him. "The schoolhouse is at the far end of town, and there is a small cabin behind it where you will be staying. It is not much, but it is clean, and some of the women from town left supplies for you." They began walking down the main street, and Catherine was acutely aware of the curious stares following them. She had expected attention, being a newcomer and a single woman, but the intensity of the scrutiny made her uncomfortable. Garrett seemed to notice because he adjusted his pace slightly, positioning himself between her and the most obvious onlookers. "Redemption Springs is a decent town," he said as they walked. "We have got about 300 people living here and in the surrounding ranches. The silver mine up in the hills brings in workers, and we have got enough ranchers and farmers to keep things stable. You will be teaching about 20 children, ages 5 to 14. Some of them have never had proper schooling before, so they might be a bit rough around the edges." "I am sure we will manage," Catherine said, looking around with interest. The town was bigger than she had expected, with several substantial buildings including what looked like a bank, a hotel, a church, and various shops. "Have you lived here long, Mr. Sullivan?" "About 4 years now. I came out here after the war ended, looking for work and a place to settle. I run a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town, raise cattle mostly, and do some horse breeding." He glanced at her, and there was something in his expression that made her think he understood more than he was saying. "A lot of people come to places like this looking for a fresh start. No one asks too many questions about what came before." There was a weight to those words that resonated with something deep inside Catherine. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, an awareness of this man beside her that went beyond simple courtesy. She pushed the feeling away, reminding herself that she had come here to build a life of her own, not to get tangled up in complications with someone she had just met. The schoolhouse was a simple wooden structure with a covered porch and large windows that would let in plenty of light. Behind it, as Garrett had promised, stood a small cabin with a stone chimney and a tiny garden plot that someone had recently weeded. Garrett opened the door and stepped back to let her enter first. The interior was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a small table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove and shelves that held dishes, basic cooking supplies, and even a few books. Someone had put wildflowers in a jar on the table, and the sight of them made Catherine's throat tighten unexpectedly. "It is perfect," she said quietly, setting her reticule down on the table. "Please thank Mr. Henderson and the others for me." Garrett set her satchel down by the bed and stood there for a moment, his hat in his hands. "Miss Morgan, I know it is not my place to ask, but if you ever need anything, my ranch is due west of here, about an hour's ride. The S Ranch. Anyone in town can give you directions." Catherine turned to look at him fully, this stranger who had shown her more kindness in an hour than her own family had shown her in months. "Why are you offering to help me, Mr. Sullivan? You do not know anything about me." He met her gaze steadily. "I know you traveled 2,000 miles alone to teach children in a town you had never seen. I know you are brave enough to start over in a place where everything is different from what you knew. That tells me enough." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Welcome to Redemption Springs, Miss Morgan. I hope you find what you are looking for here." After he left, Catherine sat down on the edge of the bed and let out a long, shaky breath. She had not expected to feel so immediately drawn to someone, had not expected the way her heart had sped up when Garrett Sullivan looked at her with those understanding eyes. She reminded herself firmly that she had come here to be independent, to prove that she could make her own way in the world. But as she unpacked her few belongings and explored her new home, she found her thoughts returning again and again to the tall cowboy with the quiet voice and the careful manners. The next morning, Catherine woke before dawn to the sound of roosters crowing somewhere nearby. She dressed carefully in one of her simpler dresses, pinned her dark brown hair into a neat bun, and walked over to the schoolhouse to prepare for her first day of teaching. She had just finished writing the alphabet on the large slate board when she heard boots on the porch and turned to see Garrett Sullivan standing in the doorway, holding a wooden crate. "Morning, Miss Morgan," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I brought you some things I thought you might need. Some chalk, paper, a few more books. My mother was a teacher back in Virginia before the war, and I still have some of her materials. I thought they might be useful." Catherine walked over to examine the crate and found herself touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. There were primers, a geography textbook, several novels that could be used for older students, and even a box of good quality chalk. "Mr. Sullivan, this is incredibly generous. Are you certain you want to part with these? They must have sentimental value." "My mother would have wanted them to be used," he said simply. "She always believed education was the most important thing you could give a child, said it was the one thing no one could ever take away from you." Catherine looked up at him, seeing something new in his expression. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. Is she still in Virginia?" "She died during the war. Fever took her when the hospitals were overflowing and there was no medicine to be had." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Catherine could hear the old pain beneath it. "My father died at Chancellorsville. After that, there was nothing left for me back there, so I headed west." "I am sorry," Catherine said, and meant it. She hesitated, then added, "My mother died when I was 12. Consumption. My father never recovered from losing her. He became someone I did not recognize." Garrett's eyes held hers for a long moment, and Catherine felt that flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. There was an understanding passing between them, a recognition of shared loss and shared determination to move forward despite it. "I should let you finish preparing," Garrett said, stepping back toward the door. "But Miss Morgan, if you need anything at all, you just ask." "That is not charity. That is what neighbors do out here." After he left, Catherine found herself staring at the door for a long moment before shaking herself and returning to her preparations. She could not afford to let herself get distracted, not on her first day. But as her students began arriving, shy and curious and full of energy, she found herself glancing out the window more than once, half hoping to catch another glimpse of the cowboy who had shown her such unexpected kindness. The first week of teaching passed in a blur of activity. Catherine's students ranged from 5-year-old twins who could barely sit still to a serious 14-year-old boy named Thomas, who read better than some adults. She established routines, learned names, and began to understand the rhythms of this small desert community. Several of the mothers came by to introduce themselves and offer welcome, and Catherine found herself invited to church on Sunday and to a quilting circle on Thursday afternoons. It was at church that she saw Garrett again. He sat near the back, his hat on the bench beside him, and when he caught her eye, he nodded politely. After the service, as people gathered outside to socialize, he approached her with a hesitant expression. "Miss Morgan, I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you home," he said. "I know it is not far, but there have been some rough characters passing through town lately, miners heading up to the camps in the hills, and I would feel better knowing you got back safely." Catherine knew she should probably decline, should maintain proper distance, but she found herself saying yes before she could think better of it. They walked slowly through the quiet Sunday afternoon, and Garrett told her about the ranch he was building, about his plans to expand his herd and maybe start breeding horses seriously. "It is hard work," he said, "but it is mine, you know. Every fence post I put in the ground, every calf that is born, it is all part of something I am building for myself. I never had that back in Virginia. We were tenant farmers, never owned the land we worked. Out here, I have got 160 acres that belong to me, and if I work hard enough, maybe someday it will be something worth having." "That is how I feel about the school," Catherine said, surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. "Back in Philadelphia, I was just my father's daughter, expected to marry well and manage a household and never have a thought of my own. Here, I am teaching children to read and write and think for themselves. I am making a difference in their lives. It matters." They had reached her cabin, and Garrett stopped at the edge of the small porch. "Miss Morgan, I hope this is not too forward, but I would like to call on you properly. I know you are new here and maybe not looking for that kind of attention, but I would be honored if you would allow me to take you for a drive next Sunday afternoon. There is a canyon about an hour from here with rock formations that are something to see." Catherine knew she should be cautious, should take more time to settle in before allowing romantic entanglements. But when she looked into Garrett's honest face, she felt something shift inside her, a door opening that she had thought she had locked forever. "I came here to start over," she told him, the words coming from somewhere deep and true. "I came here to be my own person and build a life on my own terms." Garrett nodded, and she could see him preparing to step back to accept her refusal gracefully. But before he could move, Catherine continued, "But that does not mean I have to do it entirely alone." His face transformed, a slow smile spreading across his features that made him look younger and impossibly handsome. "Then let's build something together," he said quietly. "No promises, no expectations, just two people getting to know each other and seeing where it leads." Catherine found herself smiling back, feeling lighter than she had in months. "I would like that, Mr. Sullivan, Garrett," he said. "If we are going to build something together, you should probably call me Garrett. Then you should call me Catherine." He tipped his hat to her, that smile still playing around his mouth. "I will pick you up next Sunday at 1 o'clock, Catherine. Bring a bonnet. The sun gets fierce out in the open country." Catherine watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the distance, and felt her heart doing strange things in her chest. She had not come west looking for love, had convinced herself that she did not need it or want it. But maybe, just maybe, love had found her anyway. The week passed slowly, each day feeling longer than the last. Catherine threw herself into her teaching, but found her mind wandering at odd moments, thinking about gray-green eyes and a quiet voice, and the way Garrett had looked at her when he said they could build something together. Some of the women in town had clearly noticed his attention, and Catherine found herself fielding curious questions disguised as friendly conversation. "Garrett Sullivan is a good man," said Mrs. Henderson, the wife of the man who had hired Catherine, when she stopped by the school on Wednesday afternoon. "He keeps to himself mostly, works hard on that ranch of his. He lost his whole family in the war, you know, came out here with nothing but the clothes on his back and built something real. A woman could do worse than catch his eye." Catherine felt herself blushing and tried to hide it by straightening papers on her desk. "He has been very kind in helping me settle in." Mrs. Henderson gave her a knowing smile. "Kind is one word for it. That man has been alone for 4 years, never shown interest in any of the single women around here, and suddenly he is finding excuses to come into town every other day. I would say that is more than just kindness, dear." By the time Sunday arrived, Catherine was equal parts excited and nervous. She changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and she took extra care with her hair, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face. When Garrett knocked on her door at precisely 1 o'clock, driving a neat buckboard pulled by 2 handsome bay horses, she felt her breath catch at the sight of him. He had clearly made an effort as well, wearing clean clothes and a newer hat, and he held a small bouquet of wildflowers that he presented to her with endearing awkwardness. "I know they are not as fancy as what you probably had back east," he said, "but they grow wild in the canyon where we are heading, and I thought you might like them." "They are beautiful," Catherine said honestly, accepting them with a smile. "Much better than hothouse roses, these have character." The drive out of town took them through increasingly spectacular scenery. The desert landscape that had seemed so harsh and brown at first glance revealed itself to be full of subtle colors and unexpected beauty. Garrett pointed out different plants and told her their names, explained how the Apache people who had lived here for generations used various desert plants for food and medicine. He spoke with respect about the native peoples, which Catherine found refreshing after hearing some of the crude and dismissive comments from other townspeople. "The Apache were forced onto a reservation about 50 miles south of here 3 years back," Garrett said, his voice tight with anger. "It was their land for centuries, and we just took it because we decided we wanted it. There is still a lot of tension, raids and counter-raids, and I cannot say I blame them for fighting back. If someone tried to take my ranch, I would fight too." Catherine appreciated his honesty, his willingness to acknowledge the injustices that seemed to underlie so much of the westward expansion she had been taught to see as noble and necessary. It made her think better of him, this man who could see beyond his own immediate interests to recognize the humanity in people who were supposed to be enemies. The canyon, when they reached it, took her breath away. Red and gold rock formations rose on either side of a narrow valley, carved into fantastic shapes by millennia of wind and water. Garrett helped her down from the buckboard and led her to a spot where a small spring created a surprising pocket of green in the desert landscape. They sat in the shade of a twisted juniper tree and shared the picnic lunch Garrett had brought, simple food but good, and talked for hours. Garrett told her more about his childhood in Virginia, about working in the fields from the time he was old enough to walk, about watching his father ride off to war and never come home. Catherine found herself opening up in ways she never had before, telling him about her overbearing father, about the stifling expectations of Philadelphia society, about the moment she had realized she had to leave or lose herself entirely. "He wanted me to marry a man 20 years older than me," she said, staring out at the canyon walls. Richard Thornton, a business associate of my father's. He was not cruel exactly, but he was cold, and he made it clear that he expected complete obedience from a wife. When I tried to refuse, my father told me I was being selfish and foolish, that I did not know what was best for me. When I kept refusing, he got angry. She did not mention the bruises, but something in Garrett's expression made her think he understood anyway. "You were brave to leave," he said quietly. "A lot of people, they would have just accepted it, told themselves it was their duty or their fate, but you walked away from everything you knew to claim your own life. That takes real courage." Catherine felt tears prickling at the back of her eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if I was brave or just running away." Garrett reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from hard work, warm and solid, and Catherine felt a thrill run through her at the contact. "There is no shame in running away from something that would have destroyed you," he said. "I ran away too after the war. Virginia was nothing but burned fields and bitter memories, and I knew if I stayed, I would end up bitter too. So I came west and I built something new. That is not cowardice. That is survival." They sat there in the dappled shade, hands linked, and Catherine felt something fundamental shift inside her. She had been so determined to be independent, to need no one, but here in this remote canyon with this quiet cowboy, she was beginning to understand that independence did not mean isolation. You could stand on your own 2 feet and still reach out to hold someone's hand. "I am glad I came here," she said softly. "I am glad I met you." Garrett's fingers tightened around hers. "I am glad too. I had given up thinking I would ever find someone who understood what it was like to have to start over from nothing, but here you are." He leaned in slowly, and Catherine met him halfway, their first kiss sweet and tentative in the desert afternoon. It was nothing like the fumbling, presumptuous kisses Richard Thornton had tried to press on her. This was a question and an answer, a promise and a hope, and when they finally pulled apart, Catherine felt like she was glowing from the inside out. They stayed in the canyon until the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the rock formations in shades of orange and purple and gold. On the drive back to town, Catherine found herself tucked against Garrett's side on the buckboard seat, his arm around her shoulders, feeling more content than she could remember being in years. Over the following weeks, they fell into a pattern of seeing each other several times a week. Garrett would come into town for supplies and stop by the school to walk Catherine home. On Sundays, they would drive out to different spots in the surrounding country, and Garrett taught Catherine to really see the desert, to appreciate its harsh beauty and understand its rhythms. He brought her to his ranch one afternoon, and Catherine fell in love with the neat cabin he had built with his own hands, the corrals where his cattle grazed, the vegetable garden he tended with surprising care. "I want to build a bigger house someday," Garrett said as they stood looking out over his land. "Something with real rooms and glass windows and maybe even a porch that wraps around 2 sides, a place where a family could grow." He glanced at Catherine as he said it, and she felt her heart skip a beat at the implication in his words. They had not talked explicitly about the future, but it hung between them, a possibility that was becoming more real with each passing day. Catherine's students noticed the change in her, the way she smiled more readily and sometimes drifted off in the middle of lessons, and they teased her with the innocent cruelty of children. But their parents approved of the match, and Catherine found herself being drawn deeper into the community, invited to dinners and social events, accepted as one of them. It was in late September, 3 months after her arrival in Redemption Springs, that everything changed. Catherine was teaching her afternoon lessons when she heard shouting from the street outside. She looked up to see men running past the school, and through the window, she could see smoke rising from the far end of town. "Everyone stay in your seats," she said sharply, moving to the door. But before she could reach it, the door burst open and one of the ranch hands from the Henderson place stumbled in, his shirt torn and his face bleeding. "Raiders," he gasped. Apache raiders hit the Henderson ranch, burned the barn, ran off the cattle. Mr. Henderson is dead, ma'am. Mrs. Henderson and the kids made it to the root cellar, but Mr. Henderson, he tried to fight them off and they killed him. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. She had just seen Mrs. Henderson 2 days ago at the quilting circle. The woman had been laughing, talking about her plans to plant apple trees in the spring. "Get the doctor," Catherine said, forcing herself to stay calm even though her hands were shaking. "You children, I need you to go straight home and stay inside until your parents tell you it is safe to come out. No dawdling, no side trips, straight home." The older students immediately began herding the younger ones toward the door, and Catherine was proud of how quickly they responded to the emergency. Once the last child was gone, she turned to look around the schoolroom, wondering what she should do. The ranch hand had already staggered off toward the doctor's office, and through the window, Catherine could see a crowd gathering near the general store. She was standing there, frozen with indecision, when Garrett came riding up fast, his horse lathered with sweat. He swung down before the animal had fully stopped and took the porch steps in 2 strides. "Catherine, thank God," he said, pulling her into a brief, fierce embrace. "I heard about the raid and I had to make sure you were safe." "I am fine," she said, clutching at his shirt. "But Mr. Henderson is dead. Those poor children." Garrett's face was grim. "I know, it is bad, Catherine. The Apache are getting desperate. The reservation cannot support them. The government keeps cutting their rations and they are starving. I heard from one of the scouts that a group broke away from the reservation last week, trying to get north to where they have relatives. They are probably just trying to get food and horses to survive, but people are going to use this as an excuse to call for more violence." Over the next few days, the town was tense with fear and anger. A group of men wanted to form a militia and go hunting for the raiders, but cooler heads prevailed, arguing that more violence would only lead to more retaliation. Catherine attended Mrs. Henderson's husband's funeral and watched the widow stand dry-eyed and silent while her children clung to her skirts, and felt a deep sadness at the waste of it all. Garrett spent a lot of time in town during those days, helping to organize patrols and making sure the outlying ranches had warning systems in place. Catherine saw less of him, and she missed him fiercely, missed the sense of safety and rightness she felt when he was near. It was nearly 2 weeks after the raid that Garrett came to her cabin late one evening, his face haggard with exhaustion. Catherine took one look at him and pulled him inside, sitting him down at her small table and heating up the stew she had made for dinner. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, ladling stew into a bowl. "When was the last time you slept?" "I do not remember," Garrett admitted, rubbing his face with both hands. "We have been riding patrols day and night, trying to make sure everyone is safe, but Catherine, it is wrong. The whole thing is wrong. Those Apache who raided the Henderson place, they were starving. One of them was wounded in the fight, and we found blood trails leading north. They left behind some of their supplies, and it was nothing but a few handfuls of dried corn and some rancid meat. They were not some bloodthirsty war party, they were desperate people trying to survive." Catherine sat down across from him and took his hands in hers. "I know, it is a terrible situation and I do not know what the answer is, but you cannot fix it all yourself, Garrett. You are going to collapse if you keep pushing yourself like this." He looked at her, and his eyes were full of pain and frustration. "My mother used to say that the measure of a person was how they treated those who could do nothing for them in return. We are failing that measure, Catherine. We are taking everything from people who were here first, and then we are condemning them when they fight back. It makes me sick." Catherine squeezed his hands. "Then be better than that. Treat people with dignity and respect, speak up when you see injustice, and raise your children to do the same. You cannot change the whole world, but you can change your corner of it." Garrett stared at her for a long moment, and then something shifted in his expression. "My children," he said slowly. "I like the sound of that." Catherine felt her heart start to pound. "Garrett." He stood up, pulling her to her feet, and took both her hands in his. Catherine Morgan, I know we have only known each other a few months. I know this is fast, maybe too fast, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your courage and your kindness, and the way you stand up for what is right even when it is hard. I love how you look at the desert like it is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen, and I love the way you make me believe that maybe the world can be better than it is. Will you marry me? Will you build something with me, something real and lasting and good? Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Yes, she said, her voice breaking on the word. Yes, Garrett, I will marry you. I love you too. I think I have loved you since that first day when you welcomed me to town and made me feel like maybe I could belong here. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Catherine felt like she was coming home to a place she had never been before. They held each other in the small cabin, and Catherine felt the last pieces of her old life falling away, replaced by something new and bright and full of possibility. They were married 6 weeks later, in November of 1876, in the small church at the center of Redemption Springs. Catherine wore a dress that Mrs. Henderson and the other women had helped her sew, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried wildflowers that Garrett had picked that morning. The whole town turned out for the wedding, and afterward there was a celebration with music and dancing and more food than Catherine had ever seen in one place. Garrett had spent the weeks before the wedding working furiously on the house. Adding a second room and installing glass windows, he had ordered special from Santa Fe. He had built a real bed frame with a mattress stuffed with fresh straw and covered with quilts that were wedding gifts from the women of the town. When he carried Catherine over the threshold that night, she looked around at the home he had prepared for her and felt overwhelmed with love for this man who had given her not just his heart, but a place to truly belong. Their first year of marriage was both harder and better than Catherine had expected. The work of ranch life was relentless, and she found herself learning skills she had never imagined needing. She learned to milk cows and churn butter, to tend the garden and preserve food for the winter, to mend fences and doctor sick animals. Garrett was patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise when she succeeded, and Catherine found a deep satisfaction in the physical work, in seeing the direct results of her labor. She continued teaching, though she had to take a short break during the worst of the winter when snow made the roads impassable. Garrett would drive her into town each morning and pick her up each afternoon, and Catherine loved those rides, the chance to talk and laugh and simply be together. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and Catherine would read aloud while Garrett worked on tack or whittled, and she thought she had never been so content. The following spring brought both joy and sorrow. Mrs. Henderson decided to sell her ranch and move back east to be with her family, and the town mourned the loss of a woman who had been a pillar of the community. But new families moved in to take the empty places, and life continued with the relentless forward motion that characterized the frontier. It was in May that Catherine realized she was pregnant. She waited to be sure before telling Garrett, and when she finally did, she watched his face transform with wonder and joy. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a boy, and then set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "A baby," he kept saying, shaking his head in amazement. "We are going to have a baby." Catherine taught through the end of the school year, and the community held a party to celebrate both the end of term and the coming baby. The women showered her with advice and gifts, tiny clothes and blankets, and a beautiful cradle that one of the carpenters in town built as his gift to them. Their son was born in January of 1878, during a rare snowstorm that blanketed the desert in white. Garrett paced outside the bedroom while the midwife attended Catherine, and when he finally heard the baby's cry, he burst into the room with tears streaming down his face. Catherine, exhausted and in pain but happier than she had ever been, placed their son in his arms and watched as Garrett looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature with absolute awe. "He is perfect," Garrett whispered. "Catherine, he is absolutely perfect. They named him Thomas, after Garrett's father, and called him Tommy. He was a healthy, loud baby with a good set of lungs and his father's gray-green eyes. Garrett was a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring the baby to Catherine for feeding, walking the floor with Tommy when he was fussy, singing songs in his deep voice that usually put the baby right to sleep. Catherine took a year away from teaching to care for Tommy, but she found that she missed the children and the sense of purpose it gave her. When Tommy was old enough, she went back to the schoolhouse 3 days a week, bringing the baby with her. The older girls took turns helping to watch him, and Tommy grew up surrounded by books and learning and laughter. As the years passed, Catherine and Garrett's ranch prospered. Garrett's careful breeding program produced quality horses that were in demand throughout the territory, and the cattle herd grew steadily. They added onto the house twice, creating a real parlor and a separate bedroom for Tommy and eventually for his younger siblings. Their daughter Sarah was born in 1880, a dark-haired, serious baby who grew into a thoughtful child with her mother's love of books. 2 years later, they had another son, James, who was sunny-natured and adventurous from the moment he could crawl. Catherine had thought 3 children would be enough, but in 1885 she found herself pregnant again, and their youngest, Elizabeth, was born that December. Life was busy and often chaotic with 4 children, a ranch to run, and Catherine's part-time teaching. But it was also rich and full of love and laughter. Tommy grew into a tall, serious boy who loved working with the horses and had his father's gentle way with animals. Sarah was a voracious reader who announced at age 8 that she wanted to be a teacher like her mother. James was the wild one, always getting into scrapes and coming home covered in mud or with torn clothes, but with such an infectious grin that it was hard to stay mad at him. Elizabeth was the baby, adored by everyone and a bit spoiled because of it, but sweet-natured and affectionate. Garrett proved to be everything Catherine could have hoped for in a husband and partner. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, and supported her work as a teacher even when it made more work for him. They made all major decisions together, and when they disagreed, they talked it through until they found a solution they could both live with. He was affectionate and attentive, never letting the busyness of ranch life make him take her for granted, and even after years of marriage, Catherine still felt a thrill when he smiled at her in that special way that was just for her. The community of Redemption Springs grew and changed around them. The silver mine played out in the mid-1880s, and the town went through a rough period as miners moved on to other prospects. But the ranchers and farmers remained, and gradually the town stabilized at a smaller but more sustainable size. Catherine became known as one of the best teachers in the territory, and families sometimes moved to Redemption Springs specifically so their children could attend her school. In 1890, Arizona was pushing for statehood, and there was talk of bringing more modern conveniences to even remote towns like theirs. The railroad was expanding, and there was speculation that a spur line might come through their area. Garrett and Catherine attended town meetings to discuss the changes, both excited about the possibilities and a bit wary of losing the close-knit community they had helped build. One evening in late summer, they sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the desert they had both come to love. The children were inside, Tommy helping Sarah with her arithmetic while James and Elizabeth played with wooden blocks on the floor. It was peaceful and perfect, and Catherine felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. "Do you ever regret it?" Garrett asked suddenly. "Leaving Philadelphia, coming out here, marrying a cowboy instead of that rich man your father wanted for you?" Catherine looked at him in surprise. "Not for one single moment. Do you regret asking me to build something with you?" Garrett smiled and reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers the way he had done that first time in the canyon so many years ago. "Never. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine Sullivan. You and those 4 wild children in there and this ranch and the life we have built together. It is everything I never dared to hope for." Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, the warmth of his body against hers. "I came here to start over," she said softly, echoing the words she had spoken to him so many years ago. "I thought I just needed to prove I could be independent, that I could make my own way. But what I really needed was to find someone who saw me as a partner, who wanted to build something with me instead of expecting me to fit into a life already planned out." "And did you find that?" Garrett asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I found everything," Catherine said. "I found home. I found purpose. I found love that does not trap or diminish but lifts and expands. I found you." They sat there as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the desert cooling around them, and Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had arrived in Redemption Springs with nothing but determination and a dream of independence. She had been so focused on what she was leaving behind that she had not allowed herself to hope for what she might find. But she had found Garrett, steady and strong and good, who had looked at a frightened woman stepping off a stagecoach and seen someone worth knowing. Who had offered partnership instead of protection, companionship instead of control. Together, they had built something real and lasting, a home and a family and a life full of purpose and love. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs, as all lives do. There were seasons when the rains did not come, and they worried about the cattle. There was the year James broke his arm falling from a horse, and they spent terrifying hours wondering if the doctor could set it properly. There was the grief when Garrett's prize stallion died of colic, and the joy when Tommy won his first horse race at the territorial fair. Sarah grew up to become a teacher just as she had planned, taking over Catherine's position at the school when Catherine decided it was time to retire. She married a doctor who moved to Redemption Springs to set up practice, and they gave Catherine and Garrett their first grandchildren, twin boys with their mother's serious eyes and their father's quick smile. Tommy never left the ranch, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Garrett's hair turned gray and his movements slowed. He married a girl from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the far side of the property, close enough to help but far enough for privacy. They had 4 children of their own, and the ranch rang with the sound of children's laughter once again. James proved to be the adventurer of the family, heading to California in his early 20s to try his hand at various enterprises. He wrote long, entertaining letters about his exploits and visited when he could, always bringing exotic gifts and exciting stories. He never married, but he seemed content with his wandering life, and Catherine learned to accept that not all her children would stay close to home. Elizabeth, the baby, surprised everyone by developing a talent for painting. She captured the desert landscape in watercolors that were so vivid and beautiful that people started asking to buy them. By the time she was 20, she was selling her work to galleries in Santa Fe and even as far away as San Francisco. She married an artist she met at one of her exhibitions, and they split their time between Redemption Springs and Santa Fe, giving Catherine and Garrett the best of both worlds, a daughter nearby but living her own creative life. Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, and Catherine and Garrett celebrated with the rest of the territory. The railroad did eventually come to Redemption Springs, bringing both progress and change. The town grew larger, more connected to the wider world, and while some of the old-timers complained about losing the frontier spirit, Catherine appreciated the ability to order books more easily and travel to visit James in California without enduring weeks on a stagecoach. In 1925, on a warm spring evening much like the one when they had first acknowledged their love for each other, Catherine and Garrett celebrated their 49th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted long into the night, with music and dancing and stories of the old days. Catherine, now 71 but still strong and sharp-minded, looked around at the sea of faces, at the family she and Garrett had created, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Garrett, at 74, moved more slowly now, his hair completely white and his face deeply lined by decades of desert sun. But his eyes were still that distinctive gray-green, and when he looked at Catherine, she still felt like the young woman who had stepped off a stagecoach nearly 50 years ago and found her whole life waiting for her. Later, after everyone had gone home or to bed, they sat on the porch in their familiar spot, holding hands and looking out at the land they had worked and loved for so long. "I was thinking," Garrett said, his voice a bit rougher with age but still the same voice that had welcomed her to Redemption Springs all those years ago. "We should take a trip out to that canyon where I proposed. I have not been back there in years, and I would like to see it again with you." "I would like that too," Catherine said, squeezing his hand. "Though we might need to take a wagon instead of riding, my bones are not as young as they used to be," Garrett chuckled. "Neither are mine, but that is all right. We will take our time, enjoy the journey as much as the destination." "That has always been our way, has it not?" Catherine said. "Taking our time, building something solid that would last. Not rushing, not taking shortcuts, just doing the work day by day and trusting that it would amount to something worthwhile." "And did it?" Garrett asked. "Amount to something worthwhile?" Catherine turned to look at him fully, this man who had been her partner and lover and best friend for nearly 50 years. His face was dear and familiar, every line and wrinkle a map of their shared life. "It amounted to everything," she said. "A life full of love and purpose and family. Children and grandchildren who are good people, who work hard and treat others with kindness. A community that we helped build and sustain. And most of all, it gave me you and this partnership that has been the foundation of everything good in my life." Garrett raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "When you told me you came to start over, I knew you were special, but I never imagined how special, never imagined that we would build something this beautiful together. Thank you, Catherine, for saying yes all those years ago. For taking a chance on a rough cowboy with nothing but a dream and a determination to make something of himself. Thank you for seeing me," Catherine said, tears gathering in her eyes. "For looking past the scared woman running from her old life and seeing someone worth building a future with. For making me your partner in every sense of the word." They sat there in the gathering dusk, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together that had rippled outward in ever-widening circles. Their children were raising their own children with the same values of respect and hard work and kindness. The school that Catherine had taught in for so many years continued to educate new generations. The ranch that Garrett had built from nothing was now a thriving operation that provided employment and stability for multiple families. The desert night settled around them, vast and beautiful and full of stars. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and they heard the answering lowing of cattle in the near pasture. The sounds of home, of the life they had chosen and built and sustained through nearly 5 decades of partnership. Catherine leaned her head on Garrett's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and smiled into the darkness. She had come to Redemption Springs looking for a fresh start, for a chance to prove her independence and worth. She had found all that and so much more. She had found love that empowered rather than constrained, partnership that made both of them stronger, and a sense of belonging that went bone deep. "I love you," she said softly, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you too," Garrett replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Always have, always will." They remained there as the stars wheeled overhead, two souls who had found each other and built something that would endure long after they were gone. Their love story, born in the harsh beauty of the desert, nurtured through years of hard work and dedication, had become something legendary in the small town of Redemption Springs. People still talked about the schoolteacher from Philadelphia who had come west looking for independence and found partnership instead, and the cowboy who had offered to build something together and then spent his life making good on that promise. As Catherine drifted off to sleep that night, her hand still clasped in Garrett's. She thought about the young woman she had been, stepping off that stagecoach with nothing but hope and determination. She wished she could tell that young woman that everything would work out better than she could possibly imagine, that the journey ahead would be hard but so worthwhile, that love was real and lasting and would sustain her through whatever came. But that young woman had taken the leap anyway, without guarantees or promises. She had chosen courage over comfort, possibility over security, and in doing so, she had found everything her heart had been seeking. Catherine and Garrett's story was one of two people who had the wisdom to recognize something precious when they found it, and the dedication to nurture it into something that would last a lifetime and beyond. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the land they had tended and improved, in the community they had helped build. But more than any of that, it lived on in the example they set of what true partnership could be, of how two people working together could create something far greater than either could have accomplished alone. They had started with nothing but hope and determination, and they had built an empire of love that would endure for generations to come.